Chief, it's good to sit down with you again.
It's good to be here.
It's been, what, a month? You've been on the road for a little while.
I've been on the road. It's good to be back in Maine.
Yeah, I bet. You've been doing a little personal stuff, a little business stuff as well, sounds like.
I have my both of my sons are in the armed forces. I have one in the Navy and one in the Air Force. And as it just so happens, they both got assigned or stationed down to South Texas right when I transferred from South Texas up to Maine.
Is that right?
So I went and watched my oldest son get married and then helped them move to the Corpus Christi area.
Yeah.
And then by way of D.C., making my way back up here.
Nice. Yeah. And so how long have you been in Maine? You've been here for, 6 or 8 months or so? Is that right?
Thereabouts. February 3rd was my first official day here.
What were your thoughts on coming up here?
I had never given Maine much thought. It's one of those things where, I grew up in Oklahoma in the Midwest, and then, of course, my career has taken me a lot of places, but mostly on the southwest border. And I had done a northern border tour up in Grand Forks, North Dakota for a couple of years, so I knew what the environment and the climate was like, but it just was never an area that I had really researched or given much thought to, so I didn't know what to expect. And so one of the first things you do whenever you get a new assignment is you Google.
Yeah,
sure. You check out what it's going to look like, and man, some of the pictures I was seeing and some of the folks I was talking to that were assigned up here, it was a hidden gem. Now, when I left Laredo, Texas, and the story I like to tell is that it was 89 degrees when I pulled out of there.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be when the polar vortex was moving through. And so as I wound my way up northeast, I ended up driving right through the middle of it until I got to Maine, and it was -4.
So, quite the difference.
So I got the full immersion into a winter.
Yeah.
But it was an absolutely beautiful sight. I mean, of course, I don't mind snow, especially in the wintertime around the holiday season. And I like that there's 4 seasons, and the people are just, it's got that home feel.
Yeah.
Everybody's nice. Everybody takes care of one another. So I consider myself very blessed to have the opportunity to come up here.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed too. I've been here for, I want to say 3, maybe getting close to 4 months. And that's one of the things that we've noticed more than anything else is how friendly everybody is, more than any other place I've been to.
Yep, and it's everybody's different. The places that you go are different, and you kind of take it all in. And at the end of the day, wherever you go, you're going to be as miserable or as happy as you want to be.
That's true. You're the only common denominator in that, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I had my predecessor as Chief Dan Hebert. I asked him. I'd known him for a number of years. He was on the BORTAC team with me, and he was chief here for 2 or 3 years. And so I asked him as he was retiring. I said, "Any words of wisdom? Any advice?" And he's got a really severe flat top, and he's very stern. And he says, if you're one of those people that stays inside looking out the window wishing it was warmer, you're not going to like it.
You got to get out. You got to get out and do
have
the
some
thing.
fun. That's right.
So did you do? I mean, you did part of a winter here. Then it sounds like
I did.
Okay. And so, what were your outdoor activities then?
Well, one of the first things I got to do was snowshoeing.
Okay.
So we have the border up on the northern border here is affectionately referred to as the slash because it looks not unlike a pole line that's cut through the woods anywhere. There's I'm going to say 50 feet or so of open area. And
because to interrupt you real quick, when we got there, you're like, well, here's the border. And
you wouldn't even know it.
Where? And you're like, right here. You're standing on the border. I didn't even know.
Well, that's and there's just a monument every so often.
Yeah.
Sometimes that monument may be that tall, or sometimes it may be 6 feet tall. You never know what you're going to get, but that's your only indicator. A lot of times that's the border. And so they took me up there to kind of get a sense of it, and I think there was probably 3 feet of snow on the ground at the time. But they let me, as a novice, pick my snowshoes, and I'm not going to look to my left because the individual's in here that put me up to this. But I had the ones that look like tennis rackets, and they had some other sportier looking ones, and then they had these ones that looked like you could climb a mountain with.
Yeah.
They were like little mini skis, and they had claws on them, and I'm like, I want those. They look meaner. I'm going to get out there and make sure I'm not going to fall over. And I think I don't know how many miles we walked, but I was sinking into the ground a good foot every time, and they were up on top, and I was sweat soaked, and I'm looking for any high ground that I can get some purchase, and I walked over toward the bushes, and what I didn't know is that there's air pockets, that hide there. So
Sure.
There was one particular time I walked over and I sunk in all the way up to my chest. And as I turn around to get a helping hand, all I see is the cameras taking the picture.
Sure. Yeah.
And the guy saying, I was waiting on that to happen.
So they knew it was about to happen. Yeah, because they pulled a similar stunt when we were out there together a month and a half ago when we were in the side-by-sides, and we were going up that hill. all of them right there at the top with their cameras ready to see if something was going to go wrong. So, yeah.
Yep. And remember, I told you, that's not out of any concern for our well-being. They want to catch if we do something wrong.
Absolutely.
So that whenever you retire someday, that'll be what's playing.
They can hold it against you a little bit,
right.
roast you a little bit.
Yep.
So what brought you up here? I imagine that with Border Patrol, it's pretty much here's your assignment and that's what you do. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but what brought you up here?
Well, and it's exactly that. When you move up into the command levels, so I was the number 2. I was the deputy chief in Laredo, and so they want you to be well-rounded. They want you to get a sense of the entirety of the organization and the challenges that it faces, so that you can be the best possible leader.
Sure.
And so, having done the deputy chief in Laredo, Texas, and for a time I was the acting chief, it was time for me to promote and move up. And so what they had in mind for me and the need that the organization had was to come up on the northern border here in Houlton, because Chief Hebert was retiring. And so for me, coming from Oklahoma, whether I'm in California or Maine or Washington State or Miami or anywhere in between, it's an adventure. So they called and said, "We need you up there." And I said, "How soon do you need me?" And the rest is history.
Yeah. So you were stationed in Oklahoma, or you were living there, and where were you before you came? You were in El Paso, weren't you?
So before I came up here,
right.
So I'll give you the chronology.
I'm just curious.
So grew up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
In a town called Tahlequah,
right.
the Cherokee capital. I was the first assigned over to El Centro, California.
Okay.
So Calexico was the station that I was assigned to. I spent about 7 years there. And then I went from there to El Paso.
Right, okay.
And El Paso, I was on the Border Patrol Tactical Unit team, and so that gave me a chance to go to some other countries. I went to Honduras, Colombia, Iraq, Panama, Dominican Republic, and I got a chance to travel a little bit. When I came back, I went to Washington, D.C. to headquarters. That's another thing that they really look for, is to have a headquarters tour. And so I did that for a couple of years, and from there I went to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and spent another couple years up there. Beautiful place, loved every second of it. And then went down to the Rio Grande Valley, RGV. That's what you hear on the news now is Ground Zero.
Sure.
So I spent 3 or 4 years down there. One of the things that I did was I commanded the Rio Grande City Station. That's one of the busiest and most dangerous stations in the Border Patrol right now. And then from there I went to Laredo, Texas, and I spent about 3 years there until ultimately coming up here to Maine.
Yeah, so leaving what I imagine is, well, you just said it, is really where most of the activity, it seems like, and what we hear a lot of coming up here. Did you feel like that was, I don't want to say downgrade necessarily an assignment, but did you have any sort of resentment or anything like that because you were coming up here away from a lot of the action down there?
No, in many ways, I was down there for about 8 years. It's a nice break to have a change of pace, but every opportunity that I'm given is a blessing. It's one of those things where you look at, and when would I have ever had the chance in my life, if not for being in the U.S. Border Patrol, to do some of these things, to come up here and live in Maine, to meet you, to some of the people that I've had the chance to come across. It's a blessing, and you look at it that way. When you take on the mantle of leadership, you have to be willing to sacrifice for the organization and do what's best ultimately for the mission and for the country. And if that's where they need me, then that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciated about you because we had some opportunities to spend a couple of days together and checking everything out. And I think as I posted some of the videos and the things that we got to do, and we'll talk about that, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding that there wasn't anything really going on up here, right? That's probably the common misconception, is that there isn't, not that there isn't a need necessarily, but that it would be boring. And based on what we did over those past couple of days,
anything but.
It was. Yeah. So what are some of the threats and some of the assignments that you guys are dealing with and addressing up here that you maybe normally wouldn't think of?
So it's two completely different worlds. And I think what the important thing to keep in mind is that it's two different ways of doing business because the environment is different and the threat is different. So on the southern border, what you deal is you deal in volume. There's a tremendous flow, particularly of illegal immigration, and you have the threats that try and mix in and use that to their advantage to exploit us being busy.
Sure.
Right. Well, up here, you don't have that volume, that flow of illegal immigration, but you still have the people that do try and exploit the vulnerabilities.
Sure.
So what we have up here on the northern border is a lot of vulnerability. There's a lot of areas that are uncovered. There's a lot of areas where we don't have situational awareness. And so from a border security standpoint, and when I say border security, I'm talking about keeping out those that would come into this country to do it harm. We're talking about criminal aliens. I'm talking about sexual predators. I'm talking about narcotic smugglers. Those are very real threats, and that doesn't matter what part of the border you're stationed. They always exist because they're always looking to exploit any vulnerability to their advantage. So up here, while we don't have the flow that we deal with, we have a much more vast area.
Right.
I'll give you an example. In Laredo, Texas, I had 170 miles of border that I was responsible for. And I had almost 2,000 men and women out there on patrol to secure it.
Okay.
Up here in Maine, I have 611 miles of border, plus all the coastline.
Right.
And I have about a tenth of that manpower up here.
So the coastline is not considered the border, the U.S.-Canada border, you're saying? So it's 611 plus whatever it is on the coastline?
Correct. So
That's crazy.
It's not a border with Canada, but it still is a U.S. border.
Sure. It's an entry.
It is,
right.
And that's one of the interesting things about the state of Maine is because of that. Maine is, for all intents and purposes, a peninsula.
Peninsula, yeah,
and
absolutely.
So the entirety of the state is actually a border state within that 100 miles of a U.S. border.
Yeah. You do have the geographical advantage, I would say, north, I imagine, but also I would think that those trying to enter the country illegally, especially those with ill intentions, are going to change tactics and strategies based on where the vulnerabilities are. And it seems like this is going to be more of a vulnerability because everybody's aware of the southern border, and that's what gets the most attention, and I imagine resources as well. And so I can see those tactics shifting if we're not aware of that up front.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that as a law enforcement officer that is charged with the mission of keeping this country and its people safe, I have to look at it through that lens at all times. I have to try and think, where will they try and exploit? What will they try and do to come into the country illegally or to do its people harm? And so everything that we do from an operational standpoint is geared toward that perspective. And on the southwest border, a lot of times it is so very busy. You're getting phone calls 24/7, and there's always things going on that you just try and do what you can because of the tempo. Up here, you do have a little bit more of an opportunity to sit back and kind of assess and say, okay, how can I do the best possible job with what we have? One of the things that I'm very thankful for is we have an outstanding group of people up here. The men and women that are up here on patrol, they are among the most motivated and dedicated, patriotic individuals that I've ever worked with. They're just they need more resources.
Yeah.
They need more support. They take very seriously their involvement in their communities, and that's one of the things that's extremely important. The state of Maine, they have limited law enforcement authorities because it's not just remote for us; it's remote for all law enforcement.
Right.
It's remote for all EMS and all fire departments. So we have Border Patrol agents that back up and respond to law enforcement calls for their community as well. We have Border Patrol agents that are EMTs and paramedics. No extra pay, but they take on the added mantle of responsibility because they care for their community and they want to make a difference. So they have a good, positive, profound impact on their communities no matter where they're stationed throughout the state. And I'm proud to be a part of that.
How do you advocate for more resources? I mean, that's your role, right? That is your job. So how do you then advocate for those resources and get what you guys need up here? What does that process look like? So
my mission, as I see it, number one, is to educate people as to what is the mission and who are these brave men and women that are out there doing that job. Mm-hmm. I see it every day, and it's I'm in awe of them. I'm proud of them. I'm blessed to be a part of their team. But I also think that we have to make sure that we are including the northern border and the coastal border into the picture when we're talking about the border security narrative.
Yeah, because nobody thinks of that.
Nobody does.
Before my experience, I wouldn't have thought of that.
So there's a tendency to just focus on the southwest border because, well, that's what's going on right now.
Sure.
There is a crisis on the border that we have been managing for quite some time. If you, in my opinion, since 2014 and all the way back to the 90s when I started, San Diego, you can look at pictures of San Diego and how it looked before we moved a bunch of infrastructure and personnel there, and it totally changed the landscape of the dynamic. But we've been dealing with influxes of migrants for decades. Mm-hmm. But we have to make sure that when everybody looks at CBP, our parent agency, and the U.S. Border Patrol as an agency and how they want to resource us, that they don't just get locked into looking at the southwest border. They look at the entirety of our mission, the scope of our operations, because when you say we have 20,000 Border Patrol agents, that sounds a lot different if you say it's along 2,000 miles of border with Mexico versus the entirety of our country,
right.
5,500
right.
miles with Canada, untold miles of coast, plus the border with Mexico.
Yeah.
That changes the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, and I imagine you talk about the public perception is, well, let me back up. Do you feel like the public perception is generally good of Border Patrol agents? Do you feel like there's a little bit of tainting over the past maybe even 12 months or so? What's your thoughts there?
So I think that the perception is predominantly good. I really do. We have people that stop us all the time and thank us for our service. We have people that you'll be in a restaurant and they'll buy your meal for you, and then you don't ever know who they were.
Sure.
It's there are people that see things differently, and that's their right as Americans. That's one of the freedoms that we fight to protect. The only thing that I seek to make sure is that everybody has all the information from an objective perspective to be able to make an informed decision about the mission and the men and women that do this job.
I mean, you bring up a great point with objectivity, right? Is you think a lot of this stuff is just factual, but there's so much emotion and outrage that gets brought into the equation, and so people can't look at it objectively, or they refuse to look at it objectively, and they get emotionally involved as opposed to looking at it from a factual standpoint and then addressing those threats.
And that's where I think all the education in the world, just presenting the facts, makes a huge difference. It's sometimes there is, because there's misinformation out there, because folks have an agenda and their narrative depends on that agenda, they're not necessarily presenting, at least not all the facts, if not inaccurate facts about who we are and what we do. We are part of a much larger system when it comes to border security and when it comes to immigration. Our role in that system is very defined. There are several key players and components that have to work in lockstep with one another for this system to work. And because we are the law enforcement aspect of it, and we are the uniformed aspect, we are the most visible symbol. And so that usually means that most of the attention gets focused on us.
Sure. How do you draw the line between doing your job and getting political? Because I imagine that line probably gets pretty muddied for you guys in some capacity.
For us, it's absolutely easy. We don't get political. We are public servants. We are government employees, and so I have worked for Clinton. I've worked for Bush. I've worked for Obama, and now I have worked for Trump. It does not matter what the administration is. Our job, our mission is always the same, and whoever is elected, that is our commander-in-chief, and that administration is who we work for. So it really, from our perspective, it's easy. We simply present the facts about our job and our mission, and we let the public inform themselves.
Let me give you a what if or a scenario. Let's say legislation was passed or put through that changed your role as Border Patrol agents. Let's take an extreme example, beginning to open up borders, maybe more so than they have in the past. Do you then advocate for closing those borders, or do you simply follow those directives?
So as a subject matter expert, spending more than half my life in the border security business, I owe it to whoever I work for to give them my honest opinion. And so I will let them know what I think the correct course of action is, and I will advocate for that. At the end of the day, if we are told, understood your perspective, this is how we want you to march out, then our job is to do it.
So that's a really good point. So do you feel like your opinion and your level of expertise then is being heard and is taken into consideration when it comes to some of these legislative actions that are taken upon by our politicians?
So I do. I think that they hear us. I think that they understand, and I think that that we have done the best we can to inform them. The decisions they choose to make are their own. There are some that agree with our assessment, and there are some that don't. And that's one of the great things about having a co-equal branch system of government, where you have the legislative body and the executive body. The legislators are over there making laws that they want us to enforce.
Sure.
And so we try and inform them as best we can, and there are certain things that we need them to act in order to be able to do our job, and so that's what we advocate for. But it doesn't matter where they sit on the aisle. we work very closely with all of them.
It's always funny to hear somebody when you say, some don't agree with our assessment. It's like, how could you disagree with somebody who's boots on ground, who's been part of Border Patrol as long as you have? Is there a general consensus with Border Patrol agents as far as their opinion of the way that our border should be maintained, or is there contention within the ranks, if you will?
Not to my knowledge. I think everybody's pretty much in lockstep on this. If you've ever worn a uniform, put the badge and the patch on, and went out there and done this job, I think it's pretty universal in our sentiment that we need people, good people doing the job, standing beside us, and we need force multipliers. And those force multipliers, personnel, or technology, infrastructure, equipment, those help us do our job not only better, but safer. And so when you ask a Border Patrol agent, for example, do we need a physical barrier? They're looking at it not just from a standpoint of helping us do our job better. They're also looking at it from a standpoint of, is it going to help me get home to my family safely at the end of every shift?
Yeah.
We need the advantage out there to shift towards the men and women in uniform that keep us safe, and not be in favor of the criminals and the bad guys that are trying to do people harm. Mm-hmm. And so it can be a personal experience for the folks that go out there and do this job every single day, because they're looking at it from that lens, not just what's best for the mission.
Right. So what is your take on an actual physical wall?
So a wall, and I'm glad you asked that. It's a tool. It's a force multiplier that, especially in the right places, makes all the difference in the world. It absolutely can help. The way that we look at it as border security experts, we have an area where somebody can cross the border illegally. We have a limited amount of time, given where that area is, to detect, respond to, interdict, and resolve that illicit incursion. In the right area, where a wall put up can extend that amount of time, increases the likelihood that we're going to be successful in that endeavor. That's where a wall makes sense. There's other areas where we have all the time in the world to detect, because it's out in the middle of nowhere,
right,
where we will tell you that infrastructure to respond and technology to detect make the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on the environment.
Right.
If you go along the border's not the same in any given sector. And so you need the right tool for the right place to do the job.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just interesting, because I think even saying that this is a tool that could be effective in the right scenario, which is what you said, even still that could be taken out of context and then politicized. When in all reality, that's, again, objective opinion. This is a tool. It works in these scenarios based on your expertise, and it is what it is. But it's just so fascinating to me that people want to argue with the reality. It's just an interesting thing to me.
And that sometimes is a blessing for those of us that are public servants, because we just put the facts out there and we let everybody else argue.
Yeah, and then do your job.
Whatever the decision is, we have advised and informed as best we can. And at the end of the day, no matter what the decision is, we're going to go out there and we're going to do the job.
What are some of the other effective force multipliers? I mean, we've got walls, of course. You talk about some of the technology. What are some of the things that you guys are utilizing to leverage your efforts?
Well, so right off the bat, situational awareness. So that's up here on the northern border. That's the big thing, the big ticket item for us. We need to know what's coming at us. We need to have persistent surveillance along the border so that we can at least tell if there's a threat, and if that threat exists, what is it that's coming at us? Because only then can I tell you what I need to resource against that threat. So it all starts with that situational awareness piece.
How do you do that? Because with the 611 miles of border, and then of course the coastal lines, I mean, you just don't have enough manpower to be able to handle that. So so what is it that you're doing to manage all of that area?
So the detection pieces that we have cameras, much like the game cameras that your son was showing us earlier. A little bit more
I would hope.
Upgraded.
I would hope.
but a similar concept.
Right.
We have sensors, seismic and infrared sensors that are in place that can detect people, or at least movement on the ground. We have air assets that will fly over the area and do some imagery that let us know if there's any changes that have taken place in the terrain. And then a huge piece of that is the community awareness. That's one of the aspects of the northern border that really cannot be emphasized enough. We cannot do the job without the community involvement. And the folks that have lived here for generations, they know when something's out of the ordinary. They know whenever they see something that doesn't belong. they call us all the time. So to go back to your question about is there support for our mission, you have to see the people that are involved. They contact us when they see something. They're always wanting us to come out and investigate. A large part of what we come across is as a result of the partnerships with our communities. And so that's why it's so very important for us to be a part of those communities. And that's why the men and women that do this job, they work so hard every day to make sure that that's the case.
I mean, even when we were spending those couple of days up there driving around, I mean, everybody's waving as we were driving by, and it seemed like overwhelmingly the support was positive. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Well, it's just what I have seen. The men and women that are up here, there's a lot of people that are, and I've learned that they're called Mainers. You're either from away or you're a Mainer.
Right.
And so there's a lot of Mainers that are Border Patrol agents because this is home for them. And so they have family with roots that go back generations here, and you have ones that have homesteaded, that come up here and fell in love with it. So they genuinely care. The communities that they're a part of matter. The people that they're next to, that's their neighbors, that's their friends, that's their family members, and so they develop these strong bonds and these relationships. They care about what happens to these communities, and they establish that rapport, those relationships that you can't mimic, you can't buy, you can't reassign. That's the intangible benefit behind what these men and women bring to the table up here.
Yeah, and I think you had told me that a story of somebody had called in a suspicious individual. I can't remember exactly when that is, but do you know what story I'm referring to? And I think they ended up being from, I can't remember, they were from another country. They came here to escape. I don't know if it was some sort of persecution or something, but they ended up being a criminal in that country.
So there's two different ones that I was told about when I first got here. Of course, they did this all before I arrived, so they've been doing this game a lot longer than before Jason Owens showed up. The one that really stuck out in my mind is it was a community member that just saw something out of place and called us, and we responded, and ended up being, sure enough, somebody that had crossed through that area that we were out on boats.
Yeah.
And he ended up just recently being convicted in the Boston area. He was an accused war criminal back in Rwanda. He and his family were responsible for the genocide of, I think it was 800,000 people, something crazy. That is the type of person that we are looking for. That is the type of person for which we exist. That is the border security mission. That's the type of individual that we are out there doing what we do to try and find. We would never have been able to find that person had it not been for an alert community member that thought enough to call and have us come check it out.
Yeah. I imagine for every one community member that calls something like that in, there's probably 10 or more who dismiss it or write it off or try to justify it, or you know what I'm saying? And so I imagine really getting them aware of what's going on, and then having maybe it's courage to actually call something in and let you guys do your work.
It is, and we're trying to make that as easy as possible. We're actually getting ready to launch an app for the state of Maine, which is our area of responsibility up here in the Houlton Sector. And so that on that app, they can not only see the news releases that the things that the men and women are out there doing, but among other things, they'll have that report suspicious activity, where all they have to do on that app is just type out an email, and it'll go to our communication center, and they'll dispatch folks, so they don't even have to pick up a phone and call. They can do it on their app now. And so we're trying to make it as easy as possible. But at the end of the day, this is all of our communities, and so we all have a piece. We all have a stake in protecting them and making sure that everybody in them stays safe.
Yeah. What percentage of, and I know this is a pretty broad question and it may be hard to answer, but what percentage of people would you say who are crossing the border, wherever it may be, are here with noble intentions, meaning they want to escape some persecution or after a better life? I realize it's still a legal activity, but the intentions are noble.
The majority.
Would you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, most of the folks that are coming across on the southwest border, they are people that are either economic migrants that are fleeing poverty and looking for a better way of life up here, or they are legitimately seeking asylum. There are a good number of them that are using the loophole of the asylum claim when in fact they are actually economic migrants.
Of course.
But there are legitimate asylum claims. For example, we have a large population that just recently came up to the state of Maine that came across, ultimately traveling from the Congo and Angola. those people are fleeing horrific conditions. Those places are the reasons that our asylum laws exist. We want to make sure that those people are protected and sheltered. So there are a large number of people that, yes, they're coming up here for economic reasons or for refugee status. That's why we have to have a good immigration system in place to be able to facilitate that. The problem is that in amongst that flow, you have the bad actors that try and exploit the fact that there's that large number of people coming across, or the vulnerabilities on our northern border. Those are the ones that we have to be vigilant for. Those are the ones that we have to be particularly paying close attention to. If you talk to the Border Patrol agents that are on the southwest border right now, one of their biggest frustrations is they're dealing with the flow of family units and unaccompanied children and asylum seekers instead of being able to go out there on patrol and look for
they're
those
inundated
bad
with
actors.
other stuff.
Yes.
Sure.
So their frustration is not that they're so very busy, because at the end of the day, they're hard workers. Their frustration is they're worried about what's getting across while they're dealing with this crisis on the border.
Yeah, I mean, you use that word crisis on the border, but that is kind of like, oh, well, there isn't a crisis. Well, there is a crisis, and you've used that term a couple of times now. I mean, is that how you'd classify it?
It is absolutely a crisis.
So what makes it that?
Well, so the very definition of a disaster or a crisis situation is when the event exceeds the resources that you have available to address it. And so when you have a system in place that just cannot address the flow. When I say the system, I'm going beyond just the Border Patrol. When you have not enough Border Patrol agents to be able to process all of the people that are coming across, when you have ICE, ERO, and HHS that does not have the bed space available to house these folks, when you don't have enough immigration judges to get these cases processed in a good amount of time, when you don't have enough CIS adjudicators to look at the asylum claims in a reasonable amount of time, our system has been overwhelmed from bottom to top. That is the very definition of a crisis, because what happens is everybody along the way is overwhelmed, and the people that are coming across are impacted as well. And so you see people that are stuck in holding areas for a longer period of time. You see people that are exposed to smugglers and criminals and cartels that are taking advantage of them in horrific ways. Some of the things that I saw down there in Laredo, it's a shame. From the moment that these folks leave their home and they start this journey north just to get to the border, they're in the hands of some bad people.
No doubt.
And I've seen stash houses that they should be condemned. I've seen they don't have running water, they don't have restrooms, and they're kept there against their will for a couple weeks at a time. There's no air conditioning, and it's 100 plus outside. And then they get put into the back of these semi-tractor trailers, and they're locked in there, and there's no air conditioning there. And if they're lucky enough to survive that, when they get to the next point, then they're trafficked. They're put into, I've seen the females exploited sexually. I've seen the kids abused. It's not a good situation to have to be in, and it wouldn't have to exist if there were a way to take care of legitimate immigration claims, that the system could actually process everybody that's trying to come in.
Do you have some solutions or thoughts or ideas on what is missing or what could be implemented to help with that process?
So just at the highest level, and that's why you've probably heard a bunch of us say, it's not just a border security crisis, it's a policy crisis. It's going to take both of those to actually address the situation. We cannot ignore the border security mission. That's why the U.S. Border Patrol exists. But you also have, as you alluded to, good people that are just seeking a better way of life. You have good people that are fleeing terrible conditions. The policies that are in place, the immigration process needs to be able to address that at the proper flow. Right now, if you're going to be waiting for 2 or 3 years just to have your case, well, is that acceptable? Would that be acceptable for you?
No.
So it's not just a silver bullet solution where you say, just give a bunch more Border Patrol agents. There's more to it than that.
Right.
You have to take away that pull factor that makes them want to come across illegally in the first place.
But how do you do away with that when we don't have any control over what another country does or how they run their politics or how they're doing economically? I mean, really, as a country, we can focus on ourselves and give aid to those countries who need it. But outside of that, there's not really a whole lot we can do to take away that incentive, other than maybe not be as I don't know, powerful or economically well off as we are. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and that, of course, that's why we have the State Department, and there's a lot of smart people that work in the economic side and the diplomacy side that you know, I envy the job that they do because they get to see some amazing people in some amazing places, but they have a very tough job as well.
No doubt.
You know, for my part, I focus on the on my aspect of it, the border security piece, and the Border Patrol is specific to anything and everything that comes in between the ports of entry. That's traffic that comes in illicitly.
Right.
So anything that comes in at the ports of entry, that's going to be CBP, but it's the Office of Field Operations. Those are the guys and girls in blue. You know, and then you have the Air and Marine folks that patrol the coast and support our guys on the ground. Those are the three operational components of Customs and Border Protection. So the Border Patrol agents out there, they're actually looking for bad actors.
Sure.
They're looking for people that were coming in to do this country harm. Well, when you have the folks that, for example, are seeking asylum, if they can't come in through the port of entry because they're, you know, the port of entry can't physically accommodate the number, some of them will get frustrated. And so they'll come in between the ports of entry. Well, for all intents and purposes, they're breaking the law.
Right, that's illegal.
They're making an illegal entry. So when they encounter a Border Patrol agent, the first thing we do is we arrest them because they just broke the law.
Sure.
At that time, they'll say, "Officer, I want to claim asylum." Well, what that does is that puts on hold that processing for breaking the law for illegal entry into the country until their asylum claim is adjudicated. And so once that's done, if their asylum claim is validated, then they'll be allowed to stay here under that asylum. But if it's not, then we go right back into, okay, you entered the country illegally, so now we're going into removal proceedings. So that's why we tell everybody, do it the right way.
Right.
Go through the port of entry.
Right.
Claim asylum. That way you can be paroled into the country pending that claim and not be deported or removed at the end of it.
Sure.
So
what's the process for determining whether somebody is genuinely seeking asylum or using that as a loophole to enter the country legally?
So a lot of it is based on the interviews. So the agents or the officers will encounter the individual and they'll conduct interviews and find out their background, where they're coming from, why, what their claim to asylum is. And then we also work closely with the countries of origin. So we'll talk to those folks and you know, we have very good communications, and most people don't realize that with, you know, especially with Mexico, not just with Canada, but with the Northern Triangle countries as well. And so there's databases that they have, and they share those with us. So we do everything we can to find out if that person's intentions are true and if what they're telling us is honest.
Right.
And if it's not, then that's when those claims will be rejected.
Yeah. So I imagine in order to limit the amount of genuine asylum seekers that are entering illegally would be to smooth the flow at the ports of entry. Then is that where where it's all getting bogged down right there? Well,
if you can imagine what the job of the men and women at the ports of entry is, CBP is not only a border security entity. It's also charged with facilitating lawful trade and travel into this country.
Sure.
So you have legitimate travelers every day. You have
even citizens coming in and out. Right. Sure.
Huge amounts of cargo that are coming in, going both directions. You have valid visa holders that come in to visit, you know, for the day or for various reasons. And so they're having to facilitate that. But oh, by the way,
also deal with this.
They're also looking for people that are exploiting that route as well. And then add to that, you have a vast amount of asylees, people seeking asylum. They just get overwhelmed.
Right.
There's just not enough infrastructure and personnel at the ports of entry to be able to do it. The men and women out there are doing the best they can, just like the Border Patrol agents, every single day. But that's where we go back to, this is why it's a crisis, because at every point the system is overwhelmed.
Is it just a matter of having more resources there, or actually changing the system, or maybe a combination of both?
A combination of both.
Yeah.
It has to be. That's why whenever you'll talk to the leadership of CBP, DHS, Border Patrol, we all say we need Congress to act. We need these changes in policy to take place.
What would some of those be?
Well, so when we look at the Flores-Reno agreement, so we're limited on how long we can hold people. And so what happens is, if they come across as a family unit with children, we have no choice because we don't have the detention space to hold families. It's only meant to hold single populations. And so they can't be in those environments because, well, They shouldn't be.
Right.
And so after a certain amount of time, they must be released. Well, that becomes a loophole because when they come in, they know that, hey, the system's overwhelmed.
Right. So just outwait it.
Yeah, so just outwait it, and we're going to be given a free pass to be in the country until our court date. The court date may be 2 or 3 years, and
that long?
A very small percentage even show up. So they just disappear into the country because if Jason Owens comes in illegally into the United States and I say, I want to claim asylum and I want my case to be in the Boston area. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's my choice. You have no say-so on that. The government has no say-so on that. There's also no guarantee that I'm going to go to Boston.
Right.
I can go to anywhere that I want.
Right.
And if I don't show up for my court date, where am I at?
Right. We don't know. We have no idea.
That's the loophole that gets exploited. There are good people that are making valid claims and that will go through the process the way that it should be. But there's also those that are exploiting that particular loophole. So changing those conditions, those policies, so that it takes away that loophole, that's an example of the types of things that we need Congress to act and fix.
I know this is oversimplified, but when I hear this, I think, well, why can't we just put something in place that says you cannot claim asylum other than these checkpoints? And so you will be turned away, you will be detained and deported if, for whatever reason, if you're not going through these checkpoints.
So that's again, that's for Congress to weigh in on and decide. We have to be very careful. It's a very delicate balance because at the end of the day, there are people that legitimately need asylum here.
Sure.
And so we don't want to go so far as to take away that ability, but we also have to be mindful that there are those that would exploit it.
Right.
And so that is for the congressional leaders to get together and figure out how can we manage this problem. In the meantime, you have the men and women that are doing the law enforcement mission that are doing the best we can with the situation until it gets better.
Well, you say it's for those leaders to determine, but I would actually say it's for us to determine by getting the information at hand. Because there's a lot that I learned that I wasn't aware of, and I want to talk about some of these things. And then electing leaders who are going to uphold our principles that we espouse and that we want to see taken care of.
And so that's one of the responsibilities as public servants is we simply can educate the public because we take for granted a lot of times that everybody knows what we know because we have been doing this job and we've been so close to it. And you may not be surprised because now you're one of them, but you meet people all over the country that they really don't know a lot about what's going on the border other than what they see on the news.
Right.
They don't know a lot about the mission of CBP, the mission of the Border Patrol. Well, that's our responsibility. We have to get that information out there. We have to present the objective facts and say, here it is.
Right.
You are the citizens that we serve and protect. Make the decision as you see fit. But what we owe you is all the information and all the facts so that you can make the most informed decision possible.
You owe us that, but we owe it to ourselves to get educated. And I think that's part of the biggest problem is that we just aren't willing to invest the time required, and we hope. Right? We hope that you guys are doing a good job. We hope that our legislators are enacting policy that will serve us as citizens well. But it's amazing to me how many people are misinformed and refuse to get involved to some degree or spend any amount of time learning and being educated so they can make informed decisions.
Well, and that's why having folks like you come out and show your audience what you see is so very important. That's why I would say you can't take one opinion or one person's perspective at face value. You need to research it for yourself. You need to see it for yourself. You need to talk to the people that deal with it day in and day out. There's always two sides to every story, and in my experience, if you're on either extreme, you're probably wrong.
Right.
There's
nuances.
There's always the middle road that generally is the way things actually are, and so we've lived that and breathed that for decades, and I don't expect that'll ever change because our job is. The mission itself, especially the immigration mission, can be so very polarizing and people have very strong emotional feelings about it.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. That's one of the great things about this country is you can feel however you want. You have the right to voice your opinion. You have the right to cast your vote. That's what we want to protect every single day. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So one of the things that I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with is how these different entities and branches work. Because when you say Border Patrol, I think what most people, and myself included previously, is that's all of securing the border, right? That's Customs and Border Protection. That's ICE. That's everybody. Border Patrol. It's everybody, but it doesn't actually work like that.
No.
So break that down for me in the simplest terms possible, so we can help people understand some of this, including a refresher for me.
Okay, gotcha. So Department of Homeland Security, right? That is the department that has the border security entities in it, right? Under the Department of Homeland Security, you have CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and you have ICE.
Okay.
Those two are equal to one another.
Okay.
Within CBP and within ICE, you have subcomponents. Okay. On the CBP side, at the operational level, you have Border Patrol, Air and Marine Operations, and Office of Field Operations.
Okay.
Okay.
What is Office of Field Operations?
Office of Field Operations are the folks in blue, the uniforms in blue.
So those are the checkpoints.
They are at the ports of entry.
Ports of entry, right. Okay.
Checkpoints are different. I'll get to that in a second.
All
So
right.
the ports of entry, now that can be a land port, that can be a seaport, that can be an airport. Anywhere that you can make a legitimate entry into the country,
Okay.
those folks deal with that.
Right, okay.
The guys and girls in blue. The Border Patrol are the ones that are in green.
And they're they can be at checkpoints.
We are at checkpoints.
Right.
We are out in the green and white vehicles. We are out patrolling between the ports of entry, and our exclusive job is to ensure that nothing and no one with bad intent comes into this country.
Sure.
So we are arresting bad actors. So if you come across a Border Patrol agent, it's because you're probably doing something wrong, or they're out there looking for somebody doing something
suspicious,
wrong.
or you're near that activity, or whatever.
Exactly.
Maybe. Sure.
So those make up the frontline interdictors, the frontline agents out there doing the job on a day-to-day basis. Over at ICE, you have Homeland Security investigations, and you have enforcement removal operations.
Okay.
So that is all to do with the interior. That is all to do with investigating the ones that are responsible for the smuggling activity.
Right.
So if you can look at it like a police department, you have the uniforms and you have the detectives.
Sure.
CBP and ICE.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I know, even after you told me, I'm like, hey, wait, hold on a second. Let me back up. Let me make sure I get this right. But then you have some other things that you've done, BORSTAR and BORTAC. Are those the acronyms?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. So explain what those are, because that's something that I think a lot of people just are not aware of exists.
So I'm actually glad you brought this up, because, as you know, we are actively recruiting for Border Patrol and for CBP, and much like most of the folks in your audience, growing up, I knew I wanted to get into this type of a profession. There's a lot of folks that are in the military. They're looking at getting out, and what am I going to do next? And if you watch TV and you see, what some of these other agencies do, it's actually not very accurate to what the real life mission is.
Sure.
The Border Patrol is exactly what you see. What you see is what you get. You are out on patrol every single day in some of the most remote, austere terrain. You have some of the best training in law enforcement that you go through. You're working with some of the most motivated and dedicated people. Much like the military, you're out on patrol. You're doing lay-ins and interdictions. The difference between a conventional law enforcement officer and a Border Patrol agent is when they go out on a stop, they're on the radio, most of the time their backup knows exactly where they are, and they're just a matter of minutes away.
Yeah.
The Border Patrol agents are out in the middle of nowhere. Their backup may be half an hour away, and when they encounter somebody, most of the time they're vastly outnumbered. So it is a very serious and dangerous job, but it's one that calls to a certain amount of people.
Yeah, no doubt.
Within the Border Patrol, you have three special operations teams. And so I was a member of both teams before I became a desk jockey. But the first one is the Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Team. And these guys are specialists in rural and urban search and rescue. They have swiftwater rescue skills. They do high-angle rescue. And most of them are trained EMTs and paramedics. That team dedicates itself to being out there in the worst possible areas and rescuing migrants and individuals that get in distress to try and keep them from dying.
Which is it's so fascinating that because nobody knows that. I mean, you talked about some of the towers that we have out in the deserts that these immigrants can call if they get into trouble. Yeah, I had no idea.
So it's funny because everybody has a cell phone now, and we have those rescue beacons in areas where the signals are poor. But the smugglers and the migrants alike, they know when the chips are down who they need to call.
Yeah,
they call us.
Right.
So they know that we're out there trying to help them, trying to save them. The number of rescues that take place every year would probably astound the average person that hasn't looked into this, that are made by the Border Patrol, made by Border Patrol agents. So when they get in a bad way, they call 911 and they have us dispatched out there to rescue them.
Yeah.
And we take EMTs and paramedics out there. A lot of times we will life flight them to a safe location. The smugglers will tell the migrants, if you get in trouble, call this number. Or they'll see the rescue beacon and they'll hit it and they'll wait because they know that we're going to show up and we're going to bring them water and help them out. That BORSTAR team is just the very highest example of the lengths that we go to make sure that that's the case.
Right.
In addition to that, these guys are out there responding to hurricane relief efforts. They're any natural disaster or significant event that takes place that requires that level of resource, those guys do, and they do it voluntarily. There's no extra pay. They could go out on patrol in a green and white and do that job every day for the rest of their lives, or they could do BORSTAR. They could train and go through all the things that they need to go through to be on that team. They do it because they want to. They do it because they care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The other team is the Border Patrol Tactical Unit. That is, for all intents and purposes, our SWAT team. The difference is they do domestic and abroad. So when I talked about going to Iraq, most people don't know that the Border Patrol was in Iraq, embedded with elements of the military.
Yeah, because when you were talking with me about some of your experience, I was like, wait, were you in the military before? Like, I couldn't put that quite together because I didn't know there was that unit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we would be the subject matter experts that were embedded with the military unit. For example, I was up in a place called Rabia on the Syrian border, and we worked with the Iraqi border police. And the idea was to get them to do border security missions for us. It helped to ensure that the insurgents didn't come in to fight with our troops.
Sure.
For the Americans. And for them, it was about keeping economic goods from leaving the country. And so both countries benefited, but that's the type of work that the men and women in BORTAC do, in addition to your traditional serving warrants and taking down high-value targets that are members of cartels. Our rules of engagement are all obviously different because we're a law enforcement entity, so we're looking to arrest people and bring them to justice.
It's not war necessarily.
It's not war.
Right.
So it is a law enforcement mission, but you can see how it's just a little bit different, the kind of work that they're doing.
Is that available to anyone? I mean, obviously there's probably a qualification for that, but and schools that you have to attend, but is that available to anybody who wants to participate?
So you join the Border Patrol, and I believe now you have to have 2 years as a Border Patrol agent before you can apply to go to their selection course.
Okay.
And so the selection course has some minimum physical standards.
Sure.
And then it's about what you would anticipate a selection course being about.
Yeah.
Sleep deprivations.
Be, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then and once you have proven yourself and you've met the basic requirements, well, then the training starts. And then you start. And it's a very extensive period because there's specialties that each person will gravitate towards, and you become a member of either the national team or the sector teams. Border Patrol divides the country up into sectors. And so
7? Is there 7 or 6?
20.
Oh, what was I thinking? 7.
Well, there's 9 on the southwest border.
Okay.
But if you can
20 total sectors.
20 total sectors.
Okay.
You also have the U.S. Border Patrol Academy, and you have SOG, the National Special Operations Group. So if you are assigned to a sector, you can be a member of the Special Operations Detachment.
Oh, I see.
That is assigned to that sector.
For that sector.
For that sector. And so you'll do work predominantly within that sector. You can be called out to do national level operations. But the folks that are assigned to SOG headquarters, they're the ones that are going to be doing the FID type missions, the foreign internal defense, where you actually are going to these other countries, embedding with the host nation forces, doing training and advisory missions, and then the kind of the on-the-job training.
Interesting. So do you do much with that anymore, with where your role is? Yeah, I imagine, because you were talking about being a desk jockey. So
yeah, once you start putting stuff on your collar, the having fun. It's a different kind of fun, but you do miss those days of getting to do the traveling and working with those type folks. It's I met some folks, particularly down in Honduras and in Colombia, that were just, I still stay in touch with them today. They have you think we have an insurmountable task. Imagine what they're up against.
Oh yeah.
Honduras was a transit point for. You had cocaine coming up from the Colombia area and the weapons, caches that were still around there going back down to Colombia. So it was in everybody's interest to try and make sure that was under law and order. And they are just, we say we're overwhelmed. They are as well. But there are some really good people that are out there trying to take the fight to the bad guys every single day, and you just kind of keep that in mind. That's what you're a part of. It doesn't matter what country that you're in, on an international level. People that are in law enforcement, that are in the military, it's a brotherhood, it's a sisterhood, no matter what. And there's good people, no matter what the uniform.
Yeah. You talk about going this, I don't know, it's probably not the right term, but senior or executive leadership route. I don't know if that's the right term. Is that something you voluntarily walked into, or were you tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, you're coming this way? Or tell me a little bit about that process.
No, it's voluntary.
Okay.
It's one of those things that I sought out. You know, it's you have men and women that they want to be border patrol agents. They want to be ground pounders their career, and they are the best. You know, and that's a choice, and we need folks that do that.
Sure.
You also need folks that go into the leadership roles, and so as you're looking to where you want to advance, there's folks that want to be they want to be in charge of a station, or they'll want to be in command of a unit, or they'll want to be at a sector level, or some that want to be the chief of the border patrol someday. You have to, whatever your aspirations or your goals are, you work towards that by being mobile, willing to move around, and go to these areas that are important that give you the experience that you need to be able to do that job. And so in all of government, you have the GS employees, and you'll hear the GS 1 through 15. Above that, you have the senior executive service. And those are the ones that are the continuity between the government workforce and the political appointees that come in with each administration.
Sure.
That is the group of people that lead our organizations. That is the group of people that lead the Border Patrol and CBP until you get to the political appointee positions, which, for example, the commissioner of CBP is a politically appointed position. That person that comes in has to rely on the subject matter expertise of the men and women, particularly in that senior leadership group. That's why you have that senior executive service.
Right. And you as a sector chief are in that leadership capacity.
So it depends on the sector that you're talking about.
Okay.
There are the larger sectors. You will have a senior executive service appointee, or at the smaller sectors you'll have a GS-15.
Okay.
In this case, I'm a GS-15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So what are your aspirations?
I'm enjoying the ride. I'm absolutely, everything that I get a chance to do is an adventure. I would like to keep gaining new experience, and if I can make a contribution and keep promoting, of course I'm interested in doing that. But I can tell you, if I retired as the chief of Houlton Sector in Maine, I would be very happy with that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I imagine there's pros and cons to each path, right? What made you decide to go that route?
The leadership route?
Correct.
Well, I think there's two different kinds of individuals that you can learn from. You learn from the good examples, the ones that become the mentors, the ones that become the role models for you. You also see people that are not the best role models, not the best examples,
Sure.
and you say, whatever I do when I get in that position, I'm not going to do that. Well, I've seen both. I've experienced both. And at the end of the day, if I want to complain about it, then I'd better be able to step up and try and make a difference. If I'm not going to step up and take on those roles and try and do the best I can according to my capabilities for the organization, then I really shouldn't complain about those who do.
Right.
And so from my perspective, if I love this organization, I owe it to it to give it my all. I owe it to do everything I think I'm capable of to leave it better than I found it. And so that's what I'm setting about doing. It's not about a personal goal of how many stars I can put on my collar. It's I want to walk away thinking that I left it better than I found it.
Yeah.
Because that's the legacy that I'm going to be a part of. That is the brotherhood and the sisterhood that I'm always going to be a part of. I want to look back on that with pride. And I want to look back and say, I did right by it.
Right.
That's what my driving force is.
I like that. You use the word or term complaining, right? And in the limited amount that I know you don't seem to be a complainer, so I'm not going to use that word. But what are some of the red flags or some areas of improvement that you have recognized and feel like you have an obligation to work towards correcting?
How we take care of our people. You know, when I came in the 90s, the Border Patrol was a much different organization. And there was a lot, it was a lot rougher on people coming in. There was not for example, there was not the family network. So if you can imagine moving from a little town in Oklahoma to California, I was scared to death. I was 21 years old.
Sure.
I didn't know if I could afford to live there. And there was virtually no resources out there to help me and my family. I had a newborn child. Wife and I had just been married for less than a year. and relocating to this place where I had no family network. She had no family network. There was nothing really in place from the Border Patrol to help with that. That's one of those areas where if we truly consider ourselves to be a family, if we truly consider ourselves to be a brotherhood and a sisterhood, well, we got to correct that. And those are some things that, not just me by any stretch, but those of us that have come up through that time, we see that as a gap, a capability gap that we need to fill for this organization. How we take care of one another. That goes to retention. That goes to morale. That goes to performance. That is one of the areas that we've been able to make the biggest strides when it comes to what this agency is. The actual academy itself, one of my closest friends is the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol Academy, Dan Harris. He's made leaps in when a new agent trainee comes in. From the moment they hit the ground, they are indoctrinated into what they are a part of. Mm-hmm. They are indoctrinated into, this is your history, this is your legacy. Why? Because it is so very important for you to safeguard that. That should matter to you, and every decision you make should be around doing honor to it and the brothers and sisters that you work beside every single day. Having that instilled in you, that esprit de corps, that's another area where we can always do better.
Sure.
So those are a couple examples.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we're winding down on time. I want to ask you a couple of questions as we do. One I prepared you for is, what does it mean to be a man?
I think it means being there. I think it's knowing what your responsibility is and doing it. I think whether it's as a father, whether it's as a husband, whether it is as a career professional, it is doing the right thing and being there. It doesn't matter if you're a divorced father. It doesn't matter if you're deployed away. You can still be there. You can still be in the lives of those who matter to you and let them know that you care and let them know that you're going to do the right thing. You have relationships that span the personal and professional, and everybody that touches your life, you owe it to them to make sure they know that's a motto that you live by. I'm going to be there. That to me is what it means to be a man.
It's powerful. All right. Well, how do we connect with you? I know that you guys are hiring. You're looking for great qualified people. So tell us how we can connect with you, learn more, and then where to go if somebody's interested in looking at a job within Border Patrol.
So obviously Border Patrol is recruiting right now. So we have up here you can go to the orderofman.com/Border Patrol. You can also go to usajobs.gov. You can go to cbp.gov, and there are links that take you to the application process as well. Also, if you want to stay in touch with what's going on in the Border Patrol, in particular in the state of Maine, I have a Twitter and Instagram account, J Owens USBP. We're constantly putting out there the things that the men and women are doing, particularly in this great state, and to help stay educated on what's going on around the country, but also from a recruiting aspect as well. You can reach out to us through any one of those routes, and we'll be happy to help you.
Excellent. Well, we'll sync everything up. Obviously, if the guys are watching on YouTube, they can see this. If you're not, again, it's orderofman.com/Border Patrol. Or if you have questions, I've actually had, based on spending a couple of days with you guys a couple of months ago or whatever it was, I had quite a few people reach out and ask how to connect. So if you don't remember this, just shoot me an email, shoot me a message. I'll get you guys synced up. But I just want to let you know I appreciate you. I appreciate your service to this country, and of course the opportunity to come spend a couple of days with you and help clarify some things. We got out on the range, we got out on the water, the slash. I mean, we saw it all. I think we saw a lot.
And you did well on the range. I want to put that out for your listeners as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a little rusty with the pistols. I know where I need to improve, but it was good to be out there with you guys. And I also want to say is, obviously this is Order of Man. We're talking to men mostly, but you're not just hiring men. You're
Absolutely
looking for
not.
Women too, and I want to make sure we clarify that as well.
We right now, I think, only have about 5% women in the Border Patrol. That's a number we'd obviously like to see climb. We have some great examples, some great role models for women out there that wear this uniform every day and do the job side by side with men.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you, and thanks for coming on, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.